In our world, life can change in an instant. People live and people die. But sometimes death comes in the most unexpected, even absurd ways. From viral challenges gone horribly wrong to freak accidents that no one could have predicted, it's a harsh reminder that tragedy can strike when we least expect it. Today, we're diving into the 6 most extremely silly ways people died. True stories that will make you question how something so small could lead to such devastating consequences. But before we begin, a warning. The last story is truly shocking. But for now, let's dive into the first disturbing story. Imagine overcoming the odds, finding new purpose and being honored for your courage, only to face a devastating, unexpected twist of fate. This is the tragic story of Darren Hickey, a 51-year-old wedding planner from Bolton, England, whose life took a horrifying turn in a way no one could have predicted. Darren had faced incredible challenges before. 7 years earlier, he suffered a severe stroke that affected his ability to move and speak. But Darren wasn't one to give up. He turned his focus to charity work, earning a well-deserved Courage Award from the Stroke Association. Life seemed to be on a positive track for him, until April 4th, 2019. It started as a regular day, just like any other. Around 4 p.m., Darren was at a wedding venue when a chef offered him a simple fish cake to taste. A harmless bite, right? But what happened next would soon spiral into a nightmare. The fish cake was scorching hot. So hot that it burned the back of Darren's throat. At first, it seemed like a minor incident, but as the hours passed, the pain intensified. Darren, not realizing the danger, went to the urgent care ward at Chorley Hospital in Lancashire. Medical staff gave him painkillers and told him to return if things got worse. By evening, Darren's situation took a terrifying turn. Around 9 p.m., his partner Neil Parkinson found him choking in their home. Panicked, Neil tried to help, thumping Darren's back, desperately hoping to clear his airway. But nothing worked. Darren collapsed and Neil frantically called for paramedics. They arrived quickly and rushed Darren to the Royal Bolton Hospital, but despite their efforts, Darren tragically passed away just after midnight. In less than 12 hours, a single bite of hot food had turned into a fatal disaster. An investigation revealed the horrifying truth. The extreme heat from the fish cake had severely burned Darren's throat, particularly around his voice box. Over the course of the day, swelling in his throat worsened to the point where he could no longer breathe. Pathologists described his injuries as similar to those of victims who had inhaled hot smoke in house fires. Initially, Darren had seemed to cope well after the burn, but unseen internal damage rapidly escalated. The medical team, despite their efforts, had failed to realize how critical his condition was. The coroner raised serious concerns about the care Darren received at the urgent care ward, questioning whether more could have been done to prevent the tragedy. In the end, Darren's death was ruled accidental, caused by asphyxiation. His case serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly something seemingly minor can turn deadly, and highlights the need for greater awareness in medical emergencies. It's terrible that something so seemingly harmless can lead to such a tragic outcome. But what if it's not that harmless? What if you take part in a TikTok trend and it ends up costing you your life? It was a seemingly ordinary day in April 2023 in Greenfield, Ohio, but for the Stevens family, it would soon become their worst nightmare. Jacob Stevens, a 13-year-old full of life, loved outdoor activities and spending time with his friends. Like many teenagers, he was drawn to social media, especially TikTok, where viral trends and challenges captured his attention. But what started as just another weekend of fun quickly turned dark. Jacob and his friends stumbled upon the notorious Benadryl challenge, a dangerous trend circulating on TikTok since 2020. This challenge dared participants to take excessive doses of Benadryl, an over-the-counter antihistamine, in order to induce hallucinations. The recommended dose is typically just 1 or 2 pills, but this challenge required 12 to 14, far more than any safe amount. In an attempt to impress his friends, Jacob decided to take part. They thought it would be a harmless stunt, something to film and share online. But moments after swallowing the pills, things took a tragic turn. Jacob's body began to convulse violently. Panic set in. His friends, who had been filming the challenge, realized something had gone horribly wrong. They called for help, and Jacob was rushed to the hospital. For 6 agonizing days, Jacob lay in the hospital, hooked up to a ventilator as doctors fought to save him. His father, Justin, and grandmother, Deanna, clung to hope that he might pull through. But the damage was too severe. The overdose had caused irreparable harm. On the 6th day, doctors delivered the news no parent should ever hear. Jacob's brain had stopped functioning. He would never wake up. Faced with the heartbreaking decision, Justin chose to take Jacob off life support. Surrounded by family, they said their final goodbyes. Jacob Stevens, once a bright, happy boy, was gone, another victim of a deadly online trend. The impact of Jacob's death left his family shattered, and his friends who witnessed the tragic events unfold were left traumatized. What began as a moment of fun for the internet turned into a nightmare that would haunt them forever. In the wake of this tragedy, Justin Stevens couldn't stay silent. He began speaking out, sharing Jacob's story with the world in hopes of preventing another family from suffering the same fate. He even released a heart-wrenching photo of Jacob on life support, an image meant to shock people into realizing the very real dangers of these viral challenges. Jacob's death wasn't an isolated incident. In 2020, a 15-year-old girl in Oklahoma had also died after attempting the Benadryl challenge. Despite warnings from health officials and reassurances from companies like TikTok that they were removing dangerous content, the challenge continued to spread. Teens chasing a few moments of internet fame were still risking their lives. The Food and Drug Administration, FDA, had warned about the dangers of high doses of Benadryl, highlighting risks like heart problems, seizures, coma, and death. TikTok claimed they were blocking related hashtags and emphasizing user safety. But for the Stevens family, these measures came too late. Justin and Deanna, overwhelmed with grief, turned their pain into purpose. They began advocating for stricter age restrictions on over-the-counter drugs like Benadryl and called for tighter regulations on social media platforms to prevent harmful content from reaching minors. Jacob's story spread across the nation, sparking much-needed conversations about the role of social media in young people's lives and the dangers that come with viral trends. As the Stevens family fights for change, they hold on to the memories of their beloved Jacob, a kind, funny, and loving boy whose life was tragically cut short. They hope that by sharing his story, they can save lives and prevent other families from enduring the same heartache. It's unnerving to realize what kind of trends spread across the internet, all in the name of being cool, yet posing a serious danger to young kids. But not all dangers come from TikTok trends. They can happen during the simplest of everyday activities. It was just another ordinary day in early February 2011 in Bradford, England. Brian Dedge, a 38-year-old father of 2, was going about his usual household tasks. He lived a quiet life, taking care of his home and his children, like so many of us do. But on this particular day, a simple, everyday activity turned into a fatal accident that no one could have imagined. Brian was a loving, easygoing man, deeply devoted to his family. He had an 18-year-old daughter, Shawnee, and an 11-year-old son, Ryan. He was especially looking forward to walking Shawnee down the aisle at her wedding in April, a moment he had been dreaming of. He was also dedicated to caring for Ryan, who suffered from a brain condition called hydrocephalus. Despite life's challenges, Brian worked hard to provide for his kids and was a constant, caring presence in their lives. On that fateful day, Brian was alone in his living room, hanging wet laundry on a drying rack, also known as a clothes horse. It was an ordinary plastic rack, something many of us have in our homes. As he was arranging the clothes, Brian accidentally tripped over a small stool and fell backward into the rack. What followed was a tragic chain of events. In an instant, Brian's neck became trapped between the bars of the drying rack. Panicking, he tried to free himself, but this only made things worse. The more he struggled, the tighter the bars became, creating what experts would later describe as a cat's cradle effect. The weight of the wet clothes added even more pressure, making it harder for him to breathe. Detective Inspector Mark Long, who investigated the case, explained that by trying to push himself free, Brian had unknowingly made the situation more critical. The bars of the drying rack acted like a concertina, closing in and tightening around his neck and chest. His lungs began to fill with fluid and he was unable to breathe. Dr. Philip Batman, the pathologist who conducted the post-mortem examination, described the effects of the accident as similar to hanging. The pressure from the bars caused deep indentations on Brian's chest and neck, and blood on his face indicated he had fought hard to escape. Tragically, despite his efforts, Brian suffocated, and the coroner ruled his death as accidental. Shawnee, Brian's daughter, was devastated by the loss of her father. She remembered him as a warm, caring man who loved to joke around. They had often laughed about her upcoming wedding, joking that he would kick her down the aisle just to get rid of her. But on her wedding day, instead of walking her down the aisle, Brian's memory lingered in her heart. For Ryan, Brian's young son, the sudden death was even harder to understand. His grandmother, June Evans, explained that Ryan kept asking when he could see his dad again. She tried to comfort him by saying that his father would always be with him in his heart. The circumstances surrounding Brian's death were so rare that the coroner, Professor Paul Marks, said it was likely even rarer than being struck by lightning. It was an unimaginable freak accident that left the family in deep shock. Household accidents happen every day, falls, burns, cuts. But what happened to Brian was a reminder of how unpredictable life can be. When he fell into that drying rack, his natural instinct was to fight back, to escape. But in this case, the more he struggled, the more the rack closed in around him, creating a vicious cycle. Brian's tragic accident is a somber reminder to stay calm in emergencies, no matter how difficult that may be. Sometimes, taking a moment to think before reacting can be the difference between life and death. It's unsettling to realize how a simple task can turn into a life-threatening situation. But this is nothing compared to the next story. It was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, a final visit to the family timeshare in Wales. But for Elizabeth Isherwood, a 60-year-old former policewoman from Wolverhampton, it became a tragic and haunting ordeal. On September 23, 2017, Elizabeth, known as Mary to her friends and family, arrived at the Plas Talgarth holiday complex in Wales. Little did she know, this would be the last trip she'd ever take. Elizabeth had lived a vibrant life. She was fit, active, and full of energy, playing golf, caring for her grandchildren, and always meeting new people through her job as a carer. She had been a policewoman, a teacher, and even worked for the post office. After living in New Zealand for years, she had recently returned to the UK. This trip was meant to be a relaxing escape, a chance to unwind, but instead, it ended in tragedy. On the very first night of her stay, Elizabeth got up to use the bathroom in her ensuite room, but in the dark, she accidentally walked into the airing cupboard, mistaking it for the bathroom. And then, disaster struck. The door handle malfunctioned, trapping her inside. Naked and disoriented, Elizabeth found herself in a nightmare she couldn't escape. The air in the small cupboard grew colder, and Elizabeth knew she had to get out. She fought desperately, using all her strength to break free. At one point, she managed to break a pipe, hoping to use it to escape. But this only made things worse. The broken pipe sprayed freezing water, drenching her and speeding up the onset of hypothermia. Elizabeth didn't give up. She clawed at the walls, breaking through plaster and brick, making significant progress. But heartbreakingly, when she created a hole large enough to escape, she didn't realize it was blocked by a picture screwed to the wall on the other side. Her cries for help went unheard by the other guests, who mistook the noise for maintenance work. By 5 p.m., her desperate banging stopped. The neighbors, who had been considering reporting the noise, assumed the work was finished. Tragically, it was Elizabeth's struggle that had ended. Exhausted, soaked, and freezing, she succumbed to hypothermia. A week later, on the day she was due to check out, Elizabeth's body was discovered by staff investigating a water leak. Her suitcase and clothes were still neatly packed. She had never even unpacked. The coroner ruled her death as an accident caused by hypothermia, but Elizabeth's son, Craig, and her ex-husband, Clive, were devastated. They had to break the news to her beloved grandchildren, Molly and Poppy, in what Craig described as the hardest conversation he's ever had. Craig, determined to prevent such a tragedy from happening to anyone else, took legal action against the owners of the Place Talgarth complex, believing that the malfunctioning door handle and poor maintenance were to blame. The case wasn't about money for Craig. No amount of compensation could bring his mother back. It was about making sure no other family would have to endure such a senseless loss. Elizabeth had lived a remarkable life. She had a close relationship with her ex-husband, Clive, even after their separation nearly 30 years ago. Just before her trip, they had shared a drink together. One final moment between lifelong friends. The inquest into her death revealed the horrifying details of her last hours. How she fought to survive, using a broken pipe to claw through the walls, battling against the constant spray of water that ultimately led to her hypothermia. Her story struck a chord with the public, raising awareness about the importance of proper safety measures in holiday accommodations. People were left questioning how such an avoidable accident could happen. In the end, Elizabeth's legacy became more than just a heartbreaking tragedy. Her son's legal fight sought to ensure that other families would be spared from a similar fate. This death might have been avoided if she had stayed calm and waited for help, but that's something we can only say in hindsight. But what if death isn't caused by your own actions, but by someone else? It was October 2012, in the bustling suburb of São Demeriti, just outside Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Rianne Moreira Teles, a 23-year-old student nurse, had just started her new job at a local clinic. With only 3 days of experience, she was still finding her way, trying to learn the ropes in a fast-paced environment. That day, 80-year-old Palmarina Pyrus Ribeiro had come to the clinic for treatment. Her family had recently celebrated her 80th birthday, but now she needed medical care. Rianne was tasked with administering an intravenous feed, a routine procedure for most nurses, but for Rianne, still a nerve-wracking challenge. As she prepared the feed, something seemingly small but catastrophic happened. A mixture of coffee and milk, which was sitting nearby, got confused with the IV feed. In a moment of tragic error, Rianne accidentally injected the coffee mixture directly into Mrs. Ribeiro's veins instead of the intravenous solution. Later, Rianne would tell Brazilian TV Globo's Fantástico that the IV feed and the coffee mix were placed too close to each other, making it easy to confuse them. She explained that she knew the risks, but felt she hadn't been properly trained for the procedure. "Anyone can get confused," she said. "I injected the coffee in the wrong place." But the consequences were dire. Doctors explained that the coffee and milk mixture went straight into Mrs. Ribeiro's heart and lungs, causing a painful sensation like suffocation. Dr. Armando Carrere, a nutritional specialist at the Federal University of Fluminense, said that the fluid would have filled Mrs. Ribeiro's lungs, leading to a slow and agonizing death. Mrs. Ribeiro's daughter, Loreni, witnessed the entire event. "I saw my mother getting agitated," she recalled. She opened her mouth as the nurse injected half a glass of coffee with milk into her veins. Tragically, Mrs. Ribeiro passed away just a few hours later. The incident quickly sparked outrage. Rianne was charged with involuntary manslaughter, and 2 other nurses, along with another student at the clinic, were also indicted for their roles in the tragedy. Rianne's defense was simple. She hadn't been properly trained, and it was a mistake anyone could have made. But the case highlighted a serious issue: the importance of proper training and supervision in medical settings. While medication errors are not uncommon in hospitals, this particular mistake had fatal consequences. The clinic and its staff faced intense scrutiny, and the death of Palmarina Ribeiro became a sobering reminder of the immense responsibility that healthcare workers carry, and how one simple error can have devastating effects. This should never have happened, especially in a place where people are supposed to feel safe and trust that those working there know what they're doing. But sadly, this isn't the only time people have lost their lives because of someone else. On the evening of March 18, 2018, 49-year-old Elaine Herzberg was crossing a 4-lane road with her bicycle in Tempe, Arizona. What happened next would spark a global debate about the future of autonomous vehicles. At around 9:58 p.m. as Elaine crossed the street, an Uber test vehicle, operating in autonomous mode, collided with her. Tragically, Elaine died immediately from the impact. What followed was a series of investigations aimed at uncovering how such a tragic event could happen in a world where self-driving cars were supposed to represent the future of safety. As the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board and local police dug deeper into the incident, one thing became clear: human error played a critical role. Rafael Vasquez, the safety driver who was supposed to monitor the autonomous vehicle, was found to have been distracted in the moments leading up to the crash. Dashcam footage showed that Vasquez wasn't watching the road. She was looking down for several seconds as the car sped along at 39 miles per hour. It was later revealed that she had been streaming a television show, The Voice. Despite the evidence, Vasquez pleaded not guilty and awaited trial. Records from Hulu confirmed that Vasquez's device was indeed streaming the show at the time of the crash. However, this wasn't the only failure that night. The car's autonomous systems also didn't identify Elaine and her bicycle as a threat. A system designed to prevent accidents had tragically failed. Adding to the controversy, just days before the crash, an Uber employee had raised concerns about the safety of the self-driving cars. The employee warned that the vehicles were frequently involved in minor accidents and questioned whether the safety drivers, like Vasquez, were adequately trained. Unfortunately, these warnings went unheeded. By June 2018, the police report concluded that the fatal accident could have been avoided if Vasquez had been paying attention to the road. The incident ignited discussions about the safety of autonomous vehicles and highlighted the importance of human oversight in preventing such tragedies. In response, Arizona suspended Uber's ability to test self-driving cars on public roads. The company later ceased all autonomous vehicle tests in the state. Although Uber eventually regained permission to test in California by 2020, the crash remained a stark reminder of the risks involved. In July 2023, Rafael Vasquez pleaded guilty to endangerment, marking a historic moment as it was the first criminal conviction tied to a fatal accident involving a fully autonomous vehicle. Initially charged with negligent homicide, Vasquez's plea deal resulted in 3 years of supervised probation. This case raised serious questions about the future of autonomous vehicles and the responsibility of those tasked with overseeing them. Could this tragedy have been prevented? And more importantly, is the world truly ready for driverless cars? That's all for today, folks. If you want to see more of this creepy content, click on the video on screen.